This is Jason with Chicago News, and as you can see, it is now officially winter in Chicago. We've had our first big snowfall. Perfect time to test out a V8 rear drive sedan. We've got this 2018 Chrysler 300. Let's see if we can slide it around in the snow. This Chrysler 300 design has been around for a little while now, but it is a really handsome looking sedan. You've got this really imposing, very signature Chrysler grille up front. Really nice front aero package. You've got this little splitter down here. Overall, it's a very sporty looking sedan, but also a really kind of retro cool hot rod looking sedan as well. Well, this Chrysler 300's looked the same for a while, so as cold as it is, we don't need to stand outside looking at it for too much longer. Let's hop in, get warmed up, check out the heated seats, and see how it drives. First thing we wanted to test out on a cold day like this, the heated seat, heated steering wheel. They definitely work, but for some reason they shut off after a certain amount of time. We're not sure if it's amount of time or if you get out of the car for some reason and get back into it. I just find myself having to keep turning it back on, which is on a day like today, like I don't know why the car would think I wouldn't want to just keep them on and at maximum. So that's a little bit annoying, but it's definitely nice to have those features. There are a couple of options of how you can set up the seats in the menu. You can have them automatically on when the temperature drops below a certain amount, or you can even set it so that they come on when you use the remote start on the key fob. So there are some cool options, but right now I don't really like the way that it's set up. This Uconnect system is, again, one of the better ones out there. Besides just that vehicle functionality, you've got all the different apps that you can get on this. Your controls for HVAC, everything is really easy to get to. Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, great connectivity. This even has controls for the rear sunshade, for instance. Lots of functionality here, easy to use, quick menu, so a very good infotainment system. Unfortunately, the Beats audio is a little lackluster, especially for sort of a name brand premium audio system. It's really bass heavy, which you kind of might expect from a Beats audio system, but it lacks a bit of balance. It's a little bit on the boomy side, definitely kind of a letdown as far as premium audio goes. One of the key options that our test car here has is the 5.7 liter Hemi V8, and honestly we were expecting a bit more from this. Out of 5.7 liter V8 these days, it's kind of a letdown to see 363 horsepower. You know, you would think that getting closer to 400 horsepower would be very easy. You know, there's a lot more performance that we'd like to see out of this. Obviously, you know, Fiat Chrysler has a lot more performance to offer out of other models, but for a $3,000 option to only have 363 horsepower when their V6 actually has 300 horsepower, it's a little lackluster. 394 foot-pounds of torque at least lets you do stuff like this. And it's got a decent sound, but again, just a little bit lacking in both performance and grunt. But the biggest thing is this transmission. It's got the 8-speed automatic that's in a lot of other performance Fiat Chrysler vehicles, and it's just not calibrated properly for a performance sedan like this. And ultimately, if you have a sport mode like they have here for the transmission, it should really make a difference. It doesn't really do much here but hold the gears longer. The shift times are slow. When you hit the paddle on the steering wheel, it takes a while for the transmission to catch up, and you feel a lot of disconnect between your foot and the motivation of the car, so there's a lot of slip to the torque converter. Overall, it just doesn't match the performance image of this 300S. Perhaps the biggest letdown, though, are some of the interior materials here. Again, being a Chrysler, it's supposed to be the high-end brand in the lineup, and you've got a lot of really cheap feeling materials here. You've got some flex in the door panels, you've got some really hard plastics on top of the dash. This binnacle cover here for the gauge cluster is really loose. Just hear some creaks and rattles in here, and again, it's showing the age of the platform. This has been around for a while, this particular chassis. It aged well as far as a design standpoint, but it's not really aging well as far as interior finish. definitely room for improvement here, especially if you want to charge the kind of price tag that they're charging. A lot of the gaps that you find on interior panels are not lining up on the interior here as well. So even just besides the materials, it just doesn't look like the quality is there. Not bad. It's got a direct feel, good steering, great balance because it's got a really long wheelbase. It's really easy to control the back end. You can slide it quite easily. You know, ultimately a sports sedan that's V8, front engine, rear drive, you're gonna want to be able to slide it around a little bit. That's the whole point of getting one of these, isn't it? Fulfilling the luxury side of the luxury sports sedan, this is a quiet engine. You know, it'd be nice if there was a mode that kind of woke up the sound a little bit, but ultimately for cruising around like this, it is quite good. The ride quality is firm, but a little bit compliant as well. You've got a decent ride comfort here over bumpy Chicago roads. Nothing really to complain about there. Unfortunately, the rear headroom is something to complain about. Taller passengers in the back are not gonna really fit very well. You've got this big panoramic roof, which is nice. It's letting lots of light in, especially on a cloudy day like today. That's really nice to kind of brighten up the interior, kind of stave off that seasonal depression, but you're gonna be depressed if you're tall and try and sit in the back. So there's definite trade-off there. There's just a lot of competitors in this price range, you know, pushing $50,000. Yeah, we've got lots of safety features here. You've got lane assist, forward collision, emergency braking, radar cruise, all of those features. But, you know, once you've piled all these options on here, this just doesn't feel like a $50,000 car. Because the Chrysler 300 starts at $28,000, there needs to be a bigger differentiation from that base Chrysler 300 to this well-optioned one to really make it feel worth getting all of those options. Definitely a pleasing car to drive, but it feels a bit dated, and it would be a really pleasing car to drive if it was under $40,000. You know, this engine does do a great job of pulling this car when it's on song and when the transmission's kind of fully engaged and locked up. And unfortunately, since this thing's down a little bit on power from where we'd like it to be, combine that with the little bit of the laziness out of the transmission, and it feels hard to kind of get the most out of this engine. You really have to rev it up and wind it up, which is a shame because it's got decent torque, just the transmission limits allowing you to take advantage of it. Ultimately, it's just a programming thing because this is the same gearbox that's in a lot of the other rear drive sedans that has really instantaneous shifts. Maybe it's different internally, we don't know. Ultimately, it's the same architecture of gearbox, so they could really up the programming a little bit, get this thing to feel a little bit tighter, especially when you have selectable modes. When we were testing out some of the safety features, you're driving around the city, somebody kind of pulls in front of you or tries to make a left turn suddenly, the emergency braking kind of takes over, and even though you've moved over in the lane to go around and there's plenty of clearance, it's still kind of trying to slow the car down and giving you all kinds of warnings and starting to clamp the brakes. So it's a little bit slow, and it's slow to recognize when you've cleared past whatever obstruction there is. Definitely a little bit of improvement can be made in the programming of that system. Again, just looking around this interior, it's quite a letdown for a car of this price point. You know, we talked about the materials, but also just these switches for the memory seats. I mean, these look like, you know, kind of a cheap rental car. You know, there's just a lot more refinement that I'd hope at this price point. You do get plenty of charging ports, however. You've got 12 volt up front here. You've got USB sync and charge that's in the center console here. You've got 2 more USBs in the back, so there's plenty of places to plug your devices in. Chrysler's definitely sticking to this design element of the clock up here in the center. But it's not a very readable clock, and it's kind of an odd design now in such a rounded dash to have this kind of stuck in here, to have this clock, especially with this cheaper plastic trim all around it. Again, just disappointed in the level of fit and finish on the interior here. I almost feel like some of the older Chrysler 300s were even better as far as interior finish. Other than the really, really poor gas mileage, I think one of the bigger letdowns in this 300 is it suffers from just how good some of the other Fiat Chrysler rear drive sedans are. This one just feels like it doesn't quite capture as much of that retro magic that some of the other ones have. It feels a little bit modern, but in the wrong kind of way. It's a little bit dated at this point. So unfortunately, even though this thing still looks great from the outside, definitely once you get behind the wheel, it lets you down a little bit.
There are a few things we like about this Chrysler 300. First of all, the looks. Even though it's been around for a little while, it's still got a great look to it. On the inside, however, the quality of the interior falls down a bit, and with Chrysler supposedly being the luxury half of Dodge and Chrysler, it kind of is a letdown on the inside, especially when you consider the price tag. This thing, with all the options that this one has, was pushing $50,000. So there's a lot of sedans out there in the market. You would think having a rear drive V8 would cure all, but unfortunately it's lacking a little bit on power too, so it's just a little bit too much money for not quite enough.